Our Torah portion is Vayikra. And he called. This is found in Leviticus. We're starting in Leviticus this Shabbat. Leviticus chapter 1 through chapter 5, ending in verse 26. We're just going to jump straight into the overview. This is a pretty straightforward Torah portion. It starts out with Adonai calls Moses and teaches the laws of the korbanot. This is plural. Singular is korban, which means to draw near, often translated as sacrifices. And then you have the 5. You have the ascending offering, olah. You have the meal or grain offering. This is the mincha. You have the peace offering, the shelamim. You have the sin offering, which is the chatat. And then the guilt offering, asham. So Exodus concludes with the scene of intimate triumph and crisis. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, is complete. The glory of the Lord descends, and Moses himself cannot enter. We see this in Exodus 40, verse 35. The tabernacle was built so that God could dwell in the heart, in the midst of the people. And yet, the holiness of his divine presence creates an unbridgeable gap. How can the finite, the broken, the sinful stand before the Almighty, the infinite Creator, the Holy Creator? Well, Leviticus is the answer to that question. Before a single law of purity or a dietary restriction is given, God calls Moses and establishes the korban system, often translated as sacrifice system. The mechanism by which sinful humanity draws near to the absolute holiness of God. Everything in this book of Leviticus flows from this fundamental logic. And buried in the legislation of the mincha, this is the meal or grain offering, is a command so brief, it is easy to read past. And we're going to jump right into Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13. It says, also, you are to season with salt every sacrifice of your grain offering. You are never to allow the salt of the covenant, in Hebrew, brit melach, of your God to be lacking from your grain offering. With all your sacrifices, you must offer salt. So 3 times in a single verse, Adonai mentions salt. In the biblical Hebrew, repetition is made for emphasis. It marks what must not be forgotten. The covenant of the salt is not a footnote. It is the informative key that holds the entire korban system together, and it speaks directly to the question every Messianic congregation must be prepared to answer. Are the offerings of Leviticus finished, or are they fulfilled? The answer is encoded, I believe, in salt. For us today, we reach for salt without even thinking. In ancient times, the people did not. In the arid desert, salt was sacred, precious, and irreplaceable. It was used as currency. The word salary derives from the Latin salarium, the salt ration given to the Roman soldiers. But more than this economic value, it was the one substance that could hold back corruption indefinitely. This property made salt the natural symbol of permanence. So when ancient people sealed a covenant with salt, they shared a meal seasoned with salt. Therefore, to eat someone's salt was to bind yourself to them. To violate this salt covenant was considered among the most treacherous acts immeasurable, and a betrayal of something meant to be eternal of that brokerage. Against this background, the phrase covenant of salt signals not a temporary arrangement, but a sacred, everlasting bond, one that Adonai himself was sworn will not decay, will not dissolve, and will not be revised. Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13 is not the only place the salt covenant appears. It surfaces twice more in the Torah. Each appearance sharpens its meaning after establishing the Levitical priesthood and their portions of their offerings. Adonai declares this in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 19. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before Adonai for you and your offspring. Here, the word translated for forever or everlasting is olam, meaning long duration, evermore, perpetual, continuous existence. The priestly office and its occupying system of offerings is sealed with a salt covenant that is everlasting, forever. Adonai is not giving the Levites a temporary job description. He is binding himself by oath to sustain a sacrificial order in perpetuality. Also, the word translated forever or everlasting is also used throughout Scripture for creation, Genesis 9:16, with Abraham, Genesis 17, verses 7 through 8. Leviticus, again, with 1 Chronicles chapter 15, verse 2. Pinchas and his descendants, they have an everlasting covenant in Numbers 25, verse 13. David's dynasty has a covenant of everlasting, 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 5, and Psalm 89, verse 37. And then you have the Messianic age and the king, the Messianic king, Jeremiah 32, verse 40, Psalm 45, verse 3, and Ezekiel 37, verse 26. So the priestly order of offering is not a provisional arrangement. It is a salt covenant. Also, David has a salt covenant as well in 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 5. It says, don't you know that Adonai, God of Israel, has given kingship over Israel to David forever? There's our olam, to him and his sons by a salt covenant, a covenant of salt. Here, the salt covenant encompasses Davidic dynasty, the very line through which Yeshua, the Messiah King, descends. So far, we have this as the salt covenant. The throne of David is a salt covenant. The priesthood is a salt covenant. And the offerings themselves are a salt covenant. When Adonai seals something with salt in Scripture, he is making a statement about its permanence, not its temporary acts. When certain interpreters argue that the sacrificial system was temporary, useful for a season, but dismantled when Yeshua arrived, they are arguing that Adonai's own covenantal language. You see, you cannot have a temporary salt covenant. That this category in Scripture does not exist. So let's look at Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13. The command is not that salt be placed on the grain offering only, but look what it says. With all your sacrifices, you must offer salt. All means all the time. Salt was required on every korban without exception. The burnt offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the peace offering. The altar in the temple, for example, had a salt chamber adjacent to it. So the priest salted the animal pieces before placing them on the fire. Every offering, therefore, carried an embodiment declaration. That is, this is not temporary. This covenant cannot decay. God's desire to be approached, God's provision for atonement, God's structure of relationship, these things do not spoil. Now consider what this means for Yeshua. If the salt on each korban testified to the eternal nature of the covenant, that korban enacted when Yeshua offers himself as the ultimate korban sacrifice in one person, he is not annulling the salt covenant, he is becoming its substance. He is what the salt pointed to, the one in whom the covenant cannot decay, the one whose atoning work does not expire, the one the Hebrews points out in 13 verse 8, Yeshua, the Messiah, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Olam. The writer of Hebrews makes precise this move in Hebrews chapter 10 verse 1. The Torah has a shadow of the good things to come, not the form itself of the realities. For this reason, it can never, by means of the same sacrifice they offer continuously year after year, make perfect those who draw near, which is the literal definition for korban. This passage does not say that the Torah's sacrificial system was false or ineffective. It says it was a skia. It was a shadow. You see, a shadow is only cast by a real solid object that accurately reflects the object's shape and direction. So Yeshua does not abolish the shadow. He is the solid object that was always casting the shadow. With the covenant of salt as our interpretive lens, each of the 5 offerings of Leviticus, Vayikra, reveals a dimension of what Yeshua's work accomplishes, not as a replacement for the Korban system, but as its eternal, non-decaying fulfillment. You ready? Here we go. The first one is Olam. This is the holy consumed offering found in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 9. The Kohen should burn it all up as a smoke on the altar for the burnt offering made by fire, a soothing aroma to Adonai. Here is a depiction, a picture of this. The Olam, the burnt offering, is entirely consumed on the altar. Nothing is withheld. The Hebrew word for Olah means to ascend, or the entire offering rises to Adonai as a pleasing aroma. So the salt on this burnt offering, this declared, this total surrender is permanently acceptable. Adonai will never revise the terms under which complete devotion is honored. Yeshua's Olah is his life, wholly given, nothing retained for himself. How do we know? Hebrews 10:7 says, "Then I said, behold, I come to do your will, O God." The salt of his offering, Yeshua's offering, is an eternal covenant. His act of total consecration stands before the Father forever. It does not need to be repeated because it does not decay. The Olah principle is not abolished in Yeshua. It is permanently instituted in him and its application for us. As we read in Romans 12:1, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service. Therefore, this too is equally permanent. The salt covenant is still in force. Moving on to the mincha. This is the grain offering or the meal offering, found in Leviticus chapter 2, verse 1 and 11. And it reads, when anyone brings a sacrifice offering of grain to Adonai, his offering should be of fine flour. He is to pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. Here's the picture. Also, the mincha offering is without leaven and honey. So leaven in Hebrew is chametz, and it represents corruption or self-inflation, pride. So the mincha must be without it. So the salt on the mincha, therefore, enacted a double provision, meaning the offering was salted against physical decay, and it was offered without leaven and honey, going against spiritual decay. So Yeshua is the mincha without leaven. He is the fine flour of the human life that corruption never touched. And the frankincense of his prayers ascended continually to the Father. So his intercession for us does not expire. The salt covenant of the mincha means that he is ongoing priestly ministry before the Father is a permanent as salt. So next we have the shalamim, or the peace offering. This is unique amongst all the offerings, because you have the portions that are given to the altar, which is Adonai's portion. Then you have the portions to the priests, and then you have portions to the worshiper, who eats the celebration before Adonai. I like to call this a holy barbecue, the portions where the worshiper eats. And here's a picture of what that might look like. So as they were eating, do you think that there was salt on the table? I say yes. Because the covenant of salt for this peace offering said, this peace between Adonai and Israel is not provisional. It is not conditional on continued good behavior alone. It is a salt covenant of fellowship. So Yeshua, at his Last Supper, transformed the Passover into the ultimate peace offering. And he declares this in Luke 22, verse 20, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. So the Greek word here for new that Yeshua uses is kainos, which refers to something new in terms of quality or essence. It suggests something that is fresh, excellent, or renewed and brought into an intended perfection. It often implies the fulfillment of an old form, which is the opposite of its equivalent is neos, which would mean entirely new altogether, unprecedented. So the Messianic covenant of peace is the salt covenant of Leviticus arriving at its destination. as Paul states in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 14 through 15, that he, Yeshua, is our shalom, our peace, the one who made the two groups into one and broke down the middle wall of separation. Within his flesh, he made powerless hostility. The law code of mitzvot or commandments contained in regulation. He did this in order to create with him and himself one new, there's our Greek word, kainos, man, from two groups, which is Gentile, non-Jews, and Jews, making shalom between them. So Yeshua was the solution by fulfilling the law perfectly in his flesh. Yeshua retired the law of separation. This is the ceremonial and the civil codes. He didn't destroy the moral heart of the law, but he dismantled the wall that was the weapon used to create enmity or hostility between humanity. Yeshua transforms the exclusive Passover into an inclusive holy barbecue, a meal not just for ethnic Israel, but for those who are in him as believers, making a new man. This new man is not neos humanity, a brand new species detached from history. It is the kainos humanity, renewed, brought into its destination, like Adam, as he was always meant to be. That is perfectly at peace, not only with Adonai, but with his fellow brothers. Next, we have the sin offering. Leviticus 4, chapter 2. Leviticus chapter 4, verses 2 through 3. If anyone sins unintentionally in any of Adonai's commandments that are not to be done, let him offer for his sin a sin offering. So the sin offering addressed unintentional sin. Here's the picture of all that needs to be offered for this offering. This moral debt of the people who missed the mark, as we translate as sin, is without malice. So the salt on this sin offering declared that Adonai's provision of atonement would not run out, would not become unavailable, would not decay in its worthlessness, into worthlessness. So Levitical sin offering required annual repetition precisely because it was a shadow, the substance that had not been arrived yet. When Yeshua writes in 2 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 21, he made the one who knew no sin become a sin offering on our behalf. So Paul is deploying this technical Levitical term for sin offering. The difference is not that the sin offering had been abolished, it's that it offered once with salt in a form that cannot decay. As Hebrews 9:26 says, he has been revealed once and for all at close of the age to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So we have once, salted, permanent. It's still lasting. Next, we have the guilt offering, found in Leviticus chapter 5, verses 15 through 16. It reads, if anyone commits a faithless act and sins unknowingly against the holy things of Adonai, then he is to bring his trespass offering to Adonai. He is to make restitution. This is the full value for which he has done wrong in regard to the holy things, and is required to add a fifth, 20% part to it, and give it to the Cohen, the priests. So the Cohen will make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and he will be forgiven. So the guilt offering required not only the sacrifice, but the restitution and restoration of what was damaged, plus 20%. So this offering addressed breaches of the covenant of trust. The declaration of this sacred things depicted fraud. So the salt of the guilt offering declared Adonai's commitment to full repair, to complete restoration of the broken relationship is eternal. It is a covenant of everlasting. This offering addresses breaches of the covenant of trust, the declaration, the desecration of sacred things, deception, and fraud. So the salt of this offering, shalom, declared Adonai's commitment to full repair, and it is eternal. As Isaiah 53:10 says, if he makes his soul a guilt offering, this is talking about Yeshua. If he makes his soul a guilt offering, Asham, he will see his offering. He will prolong his days, and the will of Adonai will succeed by his hand. So the salt of the covenant of the Asham means that the repair Yeshua accomplished between Adonai and humanity is not a temporary patch. It is an everlasting restoration. The offerings of Leviticus teach us that holiness requires atonement, closeness requires sacrifice, and reconciliation requires a mediator. So Yeshua, he fills all three, not by ending them, but by being their living sacrifice continually, so they stand forever. And with that, Chazak u'Baruch, be strong and be blessed. Let's bring the worship team up.